All right. Okay, so welcome everyone to week 8 of the tutorial series. Is this mic working?
Huh?
Is this mic working? Like, do you hear the amplification?
Yeah. You might be just a little quiet.
Okay. All right. So welcome to week 8 of the tutorial series. This week we're going to be learning about React. This week is sort of a special week because we're collaborating with QHacks. They're going to come up afterwards. The agenda today is pretty simple. I'm going to go over the tutorial for roughly an hour, roughly till 8. And then after that, I'm going to pass it on to the QHacks team, who will then present the React challenge. So now the reason why these slides look so ugly is because one of my directors decided that they wanted to make the slides sort of look like one of the slides from one of our CS professors. That's why there's a Queen's logo down there. But anyways, that's sort of why that's there.
It says 204.
Yeah.
I did not know that's
You
there.
added to it.
I swear I did not know that says that. Okay, so React, anyways. What was I saying? Shit, that actually surprised me. Anyways, React, okay. What is React? React is a JavaScript framework, okay. So what is a JavaScript framework? Well, a JavaScript framework, they're a collection of tested tools developers use to build web applications more efficiently, effectively, yada, yada, yada. What it essentially is a framework, what you would typically think of as a framework, but it's written in JavaScript. So what it allows you to do is to build web applications easier. So essentially you're building an application with JavaScript and it's running on the browser. A framework allows you to do that easily. So no need for sort of manually grabbing the documents element and then manipulating it and so on and so forth. So popular JS frameworks like React, Angular, Next.js, there's much more, Svelte, Vue. But the most popular one is by far React. It is by far, I think, one of the most demanded skills in the industry. So React is a way to build single-page applications. That means essentially that you're essentially building an app, not really a website. And it has one page, typically, and you interact with that page as if it's an app. And React uses a component-based structure. So in React, you can essentially split your entire page into components, right? And that component can have children components or child components, and those child components can have components of their own, and then you sort of create like a component tree. So that's sort of how it works. So when you look at a big application, you can sort of focus on one specific tiny part of that application, one tiny component of that application. And you also can reuse those components. So if you have like similar buttons or similar sort of areas where you want to reuse the same type of things, you can reuse those components as well. In order to write React, we would need a build tool. And what a build tool is something that essentially compiles non-HTML, CSS, JS code into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so when we're writing React, you're going to see a lot of essentially files that are not HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. And a build tool essentially allows you to compile them into the HTML, CSS, JS that the browser can understand. Examples include Webpack, Vite, Parcel, and Vite is, I don't think it's the most popular one, but it's definitely the most modern one. It's the way to go if you're building web applications today. And it has a lot of other features, but we don't have time to talk about that. But it's something that we would use to build our React app. So, but before I start building a React app, I'm just going to delete this. All right, so for those of you who are not here the previous weeks, which is I think most of you, I'm going to briefly go over sort of how this structure works. So for the past 7 weeks, we've been building a website, and here is our beautiful website. Currently, what it does is it fetches content from the backend. The backend then fetches content from the database, MongoDB database. And right now, the server hasn't started yet, so we don't really have any content. If I go over to my terminal and I go over to the actual folder, sorry, I should have had this prepared. And I refresh, you can see here that it actually has the content. So it's actually fetching from the backend database. So So that's all well and good. So if I look at the server here, essentially is an Express server, and we have a bunch of routes. And again, these routes simply get the content, post the content. It allows you to read the content from the database and also update it. So we can see here that we have a CMS database, and then we have contents collection. The contents collection has about me, languages, technologies, developer tools, and this is all fetched from the front end to display. And the contacts is sort of where everything is stored whenever you fill out this form. So that's how the rest of the system works, but let's go ahead and build a React app. And what we're going to build essentially is we're going to build essentially a dashboard. So I'm just going to delete this. Okay, we're going to build a dashboard that allows you to sort of edit the content and interact with the database via the backend. So here's sort of the finished product. We're going to try to build this from scratch. We have a dashboard, and you sort of have an about me that you can edit, and then when you click this button, it will update via the backend, update the database, and then it will read the contacts and sort of render things from there. It should be pretty simple. So let's do it from scratch. I'm just going to delete that. Okay, so I'm going to go in. I want the app to be in the CMS folder, okay, but you can put it wherever you want, whatever you're building. So in here, I'm going to go in the CMS folder. I'm going to create a folder in here. And to do that, I'm going to use Vite. So if you go to the Vite documentation, you can see sort of how to create a Vite app. It's pretty simple. They also have an amazing looking website, and this essentially summarizes what they do. A bunch of random types of files, and it gets bundled into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But anyways, the command that we will use is npm create Vite at latest. So, and then it will ask you, let me zoom in here. It will ask you like a project name. So I'm just going to say dashboard. And then from here, I can select React. And then I'm going to use JavaScript. Okay. I can now enter into dashboard, and then I can install npm I. And this will install React. This will install all the other tools that are necessary for bundling, so for Vite. So let's go ahead and look at our dashboard folder. So here is our Vite app, and you see here a lot of things. No modules. The typical dependencies are stored here. We have package.json, not too surprising there. But we also have a public folder. And the public folder is sort of where everything is statically served from the server. So once that's done downloading, I can actually start the development server, and I see a link. I click on the link, and then now I have a React app with Vite. And I have a little counter as well. So we can actually see that this vite.svg is served on that server. So if we go to /vite.svg, you can see here that I can actually see the Vite logo. But anyways, the point is, whatever you store here is going to serve publicly on the dev server. So I'm just going to delete that because we don't need it. We have a bunch of configuration like ESLint and all that. You don't have to focus too much on that. You're going to spend the majority of your time in the source folder. Source stands for source code, and that's where our React code resides. So assets, pretty straightforward. It's just assets. I'm going to delete that. And if you look in the index.html, which is outside the source, you see here that there is a root directory, or sorry, not directory, root element, which has an ID, a div element, which has an ID of root. And this is where React will sort of hook into. So how React works, and this is how every single page application works, is you have one element, one div root element, and the JavaScript framework, in this case React, will hook into that element, and then it will sort of manipulate things and put elements inside that specific element and manipulate it however React chooses. So you don't actually render or write anything beforehand. React handles every single element in your web page. So we include a script, and this script is where sort of like the entry point of that React code. So if you look at /source/main.jsx, if you look at main here, you can see here that we have a lot of React stuff, so lots to explain here. First of all, this is attached to the index.html, and what it does is essentially it imports a create root method from React, and it creates a root, and it passes in the div element, the root div element, into that method, And then once you have the root, you call the render method, and then it renders the HTML and the components necessary. Now, the syntax will look very weird for you because this is both HTML-like syntax and JavaScript. So what this syntax is called is JSX. So you can see here that we have a lot of JSX files, app.jsx and main.jsx. And JSX is essentially a special syntax used by React that is sort of a merge between JavaScript and HTML-like syntax. But under the hood, it's actually just JavaScript. This gets compiled by Vite under the hood into just regular JavaScript objects. So in here, this is one object, and this object kind of has an attribute, which is this app object. But that's abstracted away from you, so you can sort of treat this as if it's HTML. But it's not exactly HTML because these components are special components that are made by React. So obviously these are not default or built-in HTML components. So I'm going to delete the app.jsx because we're going to build it from scratch. Okay, so we have here, I'm going to delete this as well. Okay, so let's say I want to build the app.jsx component. We just write app.jsx. By convention, components are renamed as or named with a capital letter. So we do export default function app, like so. Now, every component in React is a function. And I'm exporting this function as a default export, so I can import it from this main.jsx. So here I'm exporting the component, or otherwise, importing or exporting the function. And then I can actually return whatever this component renders. So I can return, for example, in h1, hello world. And from the main.jsx, we can import it. I'm going to import app from /app. You also notice that I don't have a .jsx here. That's another magic of Vite. So, and here I can just write app as if it is its own HTML element. So I can write here the app component, and it will be rendered on the screen. If I go back, you can see here h1 hello world, right? So the most basic thing that you could do is just this, rendering HTML. But you can also use what's called props, and prop stands for properties. And what props are, they allow you to essentially pass data down to components, and then when those components have that data, they can choose to do whatever they want with it, whether or not they want to do some calculation or just render it. It's all up to the component. So to do that, we're going to have like essentially an attribute. So actually, I'm not going to do it from here. I'm going to do it from the app. So let's say I want. I guess I'll do it from here. Let's say I want to pass certain properties to this app component. Maybe I'm going to call it data. It doesn't matter what you call it. And then I'm going to do curly brackets. Curly brackets mean that you're escaping from HTML back to JavaScript. So right now I can write JavaScript. I can do JavaScript stuff like 1 + 2. I can also do data 2 equals to 15, right? Doesn't matter. But essentially I can pass multiple properties, and the syntax is exactly the same as HTML attributes. So once I pass it down to the app component, if I go back to the app component, I can receive these props via the prop object as the input parameter of that component or of that function. So the prop will now have prop.data and also prop.data2. But an easier way of writing this is to simply destructure the app, or destructure the prop by doing data and data2. So it's the same thing. We're just extracting the components, not the components, the props. And then now we have access to data and data2, and we can actually render, let's say in here, we can actually render data. So if I go back, you can see here 3. If I want to render another h1 of a data2, you can see here that it doesn't work. And the reason why is because with React components, you can only return one component. And the reason why is because in JavaScript, you can only return one object, right? So we can't return 2 components. So the solution to that is to wrap it in another component. So here we're technically returning one component, we're returning one JavaScript object, but we have more components or elements nested inside of that. So if you don't want the actual div, you can do this, delete the div, and you see here an empty tag, and that's essentially the same thing, except you won't have an actual div there. You would have h1 and h2, the 2 h1s, and you will just have, they're adjacent to each other, but you have one JavaScript object because it's rendered as such. Okay, so now that we have that, the next concept to go over is state. So I'm going to delete this. State is probably the most used hook. And what hooks are essentially ways in which you can hook onto the features of React. So to do that, I'm going to import useState, which is the hook that we're going to use the state feature of React. And then using this useState, I can have state in components. And what state essentially is a component state is data that it owns that it can manipulate and choose to render however it pleases, and as well as passing it as props down to child components. So to initialize a state, I'm going to do const. Let's say I want a toggle, right? Let's say I want like maybe an H1 that says on, and maybe like a button that says toggle, right? And then I go back, and then maybe I want, when I click this button, I want this toggle to sort of toggle on and off, right? Or this goes on and off. So I can use the state to keep track of the state of that, whether it's on or off. So that's a Boolean value. So I'm going to do const, I'm going to do mode, which represents the state, set mode equals to useState true. So what this means is I'm using the useState hook, and I'm passing in true because I want that to be the initial value of that state. So initially, the state is going to be true. And then this whole method or function will return an array with two elements. One is the first element is the state. The second element is the setter of that state. So this is a function that sets the state, changes the state. So I'm going to destructure that into mode and set mode. Okay? So now I have access to the state, and I have access to set mode, which is the setter for that state. And from here, I can actually determine whether or not I'm going to render on or off by saying maybe const text equals to if mode is true, then I want it to be on. Otherwise, I want it to be off. Right? This is just a JavaScript syntax that says if mode is on, I want the string of on to be assigned. If not, I want the string of off. And from here, I can actually render text. Right? So you see here that if I go back, it's still sort of stuck on because it's initially true, so it's on, but the toggle doesn't actually do anything. So what we can do is we can create a function that essentially changes the state. So we can do function handle click, right? So this function will be called whenever that button gets clicked. And whenever that button gets clicked, I'm going to do set mode to whatever mode is currently not. So if it's true, it will set it to false, false, then true. And then once we have that function, we can attach it as an onClick attribute to the button. So I'm going to do onClick. And you can see here that I'm escaping into JavaScript. And then I'm passing in the handle click function. So if I click this, it will call this, and then it will reset the state. And then it will re-render this entire component with the new text. So if I go back, you see here that I can toggle on and off. So that's essential. That's essentially how state works. And state can be anything, right? State could be a Boolean, state can be a string, an array, object, can be anything. In this case, it's Boolean, but it can be anything. So that's essentially the basics. So let's actually try and build the dashboard that we just saw earlier. So we have, so first of all, I'm going to write I'm going to delete all this, and I'm going to write maybe a div, an h1, I'm going to call it dashboard, and we have a dashboard, and let's say I want to style this. How do you style React apps? To style React apps, you can actually import CSS files. So I know it looks a bit weird, but this is another magic of Vite. You can import CSS files, and they will be applied to the web page. And so in the index.css, I can actually put in my styles here. Maybe I want the root element that we just saw earlier in the index.html. Maybe I want the margin to be auto so that it sort of centers. So now we have a centered dashboard H1. So now maybe I want the sort of text box that edits the content, right? Edits the description. So I'm going to create another component for that. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to say, about me, so it changes the about me description. And then I'm going to export it, export default function about me. And from here I can return a div, and inside this div maybe I want an h2 that says about me, and then I want maybe a text area. And right now I'm not going to do anything with this text area, it just sort of displays it. And then we're going to import that component, so import about me, and then we're going to use it down here, about me. Okay, so now that we have that, we have dashboard, this gigantic component, and there's a children component or child component, and then you have a little text area here. So maybe I want the initial value to be something, right? So to do that, I can actually add in here value equals to something, right? And the initial value will be something. So what I want is the initial value to be the description from the website. So what it currently is, right? And right now it's a little small, so I'm gonna maybe change it up a little bit. Maybe 5 rows and maybe 70 columns. That's a bit wide. 50, yeah, looks about right. So okay, now that value is something, you can see that I can't really type anything because value is constantly something. So what we want is to actually, first of all, we want to fetch from the database. So I want to fetch from the database of what the about me is, and then we're going to render it here initially. So to do that, I'm going to call the backend route of localhost 3000 / contents. So in this route, it outputs the JSON of the about me description, as well as all the other content. So I'm going to fetch from that on the front end. I'm going to do it from the app component. So, and to just simplify things like post request and get request is just much easier on a library called Axios. So I'm going to download Axios. Doesn't have to. You can use the default fetch. You don't have to. But I can download Axios and I can import it. So import Axios from Axios. That's another magic of Vite. It allows you to import stuff very easily. So now that we have Axios, we can actually fetch. To fetch things in React, we want to create a side effect, because fetching is a side effect. And a side effect is essentially a thing that happens after a component is rendered. So when I change the state, this is the toggle that I just built earlier. When I click the toggle button, it's something that happens due to user interaction. Side effects are essentially, or use effect is essentially used for changes or things that happen that is caused by rendering itself, not by user interaction. And so fetching that data initially is caused by rendering itself, not by a user interaction. So we're going to have to use the use effect hook, which is probably the second most used hook. So I'm going to do import use effect from React, and then I'm actually going to store whatever I fetched in a state. So I'm going to need a state as well. So I'm going to go here and import use state as well. Okay, so now that I have use effect and use state, I'm going to essentially declare the state first. So const content set content equals to use state. Initially, it's going to be undefined. That's fine. And then I'm going to define the side effect. And so the side effect will take in the first parameter as a function, and this function will be the side effect. And the side effect is I want to get the content, right? So I'm going to do axios.get, and then the URL, which is http://localhost 3000/contents. Once I have the content, I'm going to, so it's asynchronous, so I need a response. And inside that .then method, I'm going to have the response, and then I'm going to set the content state to response.data, right? Response.data is the actual data. So now that we have that, we want to actually pass in the contents about me property. So you can see here that I get this as the state. I want to pass in this property down to the about me description. So to do that, I'm going to go here and say about me equals to content dot about me. So I pass it as a prop. Now, once I receive that prop from the about me, I can actually destructure it out. So about me. Once I have that destructured out, I'm going to set it as the initial value. So in the value, I'm going to escape to JavaScript, and then value equals to about me. So now that we have that as the initial value, I go back, I refresh. Well, I guess I don't even have to refresh. Oh, it broke. Yikes. Right, reading properties of undefined. Why is that? Because initially it's set as undefined, so there is one split moment before it actually finishes loading where content is undefined and I'm reading about me in undefined. So in here we actually have to handle loading state. So as it's loading, when content is undefined, we need to render something else. To do that, I'm simply going to say if not content, I want to return an h1 maybe that just says loading. H1 loading. Right? So if content is falsy, so if it's undefined, I'll return loading. If not, I'll return the normal thing. So now, if I refresh, we'll have a flash of loading, and then it will load the actual thing. But the issue is I can't type. And the reason why I can't type is because value is constantly about me. It's sort of static. And so to do that, or to fix that rather, I'm going to have a state in this component that keeps track of what is being currently typed in the inbox. So to do that, I'm going to import useState. And then from there, I'm going to do const input set input equals to useState. Right? Initially, it will be about me. So the initial value of this input or this state will be about me. And then from here, I can actually pass in that at any given time, the input should be, or the value should be the input. Now, that works for the state, but I still can't type because it's still just input. So I got to handle onChange. So I'm going to create a function here that says handle change. And what I'm going to do is this handle change will be passed as an onChange. So it's going to receive an event object. And then I'm going to set the input to the event.target.value. And this essentially grabs the event.target, which is the actual element, the actual text area, and grabs its value, sets the input to that value, and then it will update on the value. So in the text area, I'm simply going to say onChange equals to handle change. So whenever this text area changes, it will call this function, it will grab whatever is there, and input it as the input to that value. So now I can actually type, but the difference is whatever I type will be tracked by that state. And the reason why I want that is because once I have that state, I can then make a post request to update the actual content. So right now we don't have a button. Let's just write a button that says update. So now we have a button that says update. Maybe I want like a break from there. Yeah. So update, right? And if I click this update button, I want it so that it just updates whatever is here. So I'm going to refresh to go back to the initial state. Okay, so how do we do this? We essentially have to make a post request to this route with this gigantic object, except the about me is different. So to do that, I'm going to essentially make that request or define that function in the app component. And the reason why is because I need to make a post request with this whole object. And only app has access to the whole content object. So to do that, I'm going to write another function. I'm going to call this function update about me. It's going to receive a new about me. And what it's going to do is it's going to make a post request to http://localhost 3000 / contents, right? And then I'm going to pass in the data or the body of that post request as an object with all of the contents attribute, right? So this is the spread syntax. I'm spreading all the contents attribute, except about me is equal to the new about me. So it makes that post request, and that's pretty much it. Right now, we got to pass this about me function as a prop to the children component or the child component. So to do that, I'm going to go here, and I'm going to do update about me equals to update about me. So now I'm passing that function down as a prop, and from here I can actually write that or destructure that method. So update about me. Alrighty. Now that we have the update about me function, I can actually update the description. So so from here, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to say in this button, I'm going to do onClick. Once this button is clicked, it's going to call a function that calls the about or update about me function with the whatever is in input. So hopefully this makes sense, and hopefully this works. So right now we have the initial description. So let's say I want to change it into, I don't know, description, edited, whatever, right? If I click on the button, I go back to the database, I refresh, you can see here that description is edited, thank God it worked. And I go back here, refresh the page, description edited, right? So now I can actually have a dashboard where I can just sort of write whatever and then click the update button and the front end will be updated. Now, you can sort of, you get the idea. You can sort of do the same thing with languages, you can do the same thing with technologies, you can do the same thing with developer tools. And so I'm not going to go over that too much, but another thing we could do is maybe render all of the contacts or all the submissions of the of this form into that dashboard, right? So maybe I want another component for that. So I'm going to go here. By the way, this is the reason why this exists is because it wants a prop typing thing. So it wants me to sort of specify the type, but I'm too lazy to do that. So that's why it warns me. I can actually copy this line from the other repository and then place it in ESLint, just so that ESLint ignores that rule, so I don't get that warning. But it's essentially just the ESLinting thing. Anyways, so let's say I want to create another component that lists all the contacts, right? So I'm going to do a new component, contacts.jsx, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export the function, so export default function contacts. And this function, or this component, is going to receive a prop, which is just a list of contacts, and it's simply going to render that. So to render that, I'm going to maybe have a div, and then the h1 will be like contacts, right? And then maybe below that we have like a UL, unordered list, and then a list item, a series of list item. But we want every single contact to be rendered here. So to loop through an array inside React to render specific elements, we can use the map function. So I'm going to escape to JavaScript land, and I'm going to do contacts, which is an array, dot map. And I'm going to pass in the function, which takes the individual contact, and then I'm going to define that function. So for every single contact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return an li. That is essentially the contact, and if you look at the shape of the contact, which is localhost 3000/contacts, you can see here that these are the contacts, right? We have first name, last name, subject. So we can do contact.first name, contact, whoa, okay, contact at first name, and then a space, contact.last name, and then maybe like a colon, which will specify the contact.subject, right? This line is getting a bit long. I'm going to break it apart a little bit. Use some parentheses. Anyways, holy cow, this is a bit of a nightmare. Okay, so this works, but you see here that it says missing key property, right? So whenever you're looping through an array to render multiple elements of that array, you have to give each of that element a key property. And the reason why is because React needs to keep track of these individual elements so that they don't confuse each other. So the key property should be a unique identifier of this specific element. So I can make it maybe the contact first name, but contact first name can have duplicates, so can last name, so can subject. So the best way, now you think index is a good way to do this, but index is not, because you can actually reorder an array. So when you reorder the array, or when you delete something from the array, the index changes. So it's not nice practice to use the index. So I'm going to use the ID. And you can see here from the database we have _ID. So I'm going to do that. Key equals to contact._ID. So whenever you are looping through an array and rendering something, you need to specify a key to that element, just so React can differentiate between, in this case, one li from another li. So that's all good. Now I'm just going to go back to the app. I'm going to import the component, import contacts from contacts. And then now that I have the component, I can then render it. But before I do that, I need to pass it the prop of contacts. And before I do that, I have to request it. So I'm going to go to, well, here it is, localhost 3000 / contacts. That's the URL. So it's another side effect, right? Because you need to fetch it on load. So I'm going to just put it in the same use effect. Oh, another thing I didn't explain is use effect has another parameter, the second parameter, which is a dependency array. And inside this dependency array is essentially a list of all the side effects dependencies. If something is listed as a side effects dependency, it means that that thing, whenever that thing changes, the side effect will run again. So for example, if this thing depends on a state, whenever that state changes, the side effect will be ran again. So, but in this case, I don't really want it to rerun. I want it to just run the side effect once on initial mount, and then just never run it again because it's a data fetching thing. So I'm just going to give it an empty array. It should be a comma. Okay, so once I have the contents, I want to also specify that I want to get the contacts. So axios.get localhost 3000 / contacts .then. And then once I have the response, I want to set the contacts state, which we don't have yet, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to create another state. This state keeps track of the contacts. Contacts set contacts equals to use state. Initially, again, is undefined. So once I have the response, I'm going to set the contacts into the response.data. Okay, so now that we have the contacts, I'm actually going to go here and say that if not content, so if the content is not loaded, or not contacts, so if neither of them are loaded, or if either one of them is not loaded, I'm going to specify loading. If both of them are finished loading, then I'm going to render everything else. So from here, I'm going to render the contacts page, or the component rather, contacts. And then from here, I'm going to pass in the prompt, or the prop of contacts, which is our current context state. And this should work. I save, go back, and you see here that everything works. So again, you can render this however you like, right? In fact, you can actually have a button here and just delete certain LIs if you want, but we're not going to do that because we don't have time. But that's essentially how React works. So if I submit another submission here down in the form, I don't know, submit, and I refresh, you see here that there's a new submission. Because the front end calls the back end updates the database, and then this fetches the content from the back end. So that's pretty much it. Is anybody confused? Any questions? Yes?
The lectures will be posted on YouTube, right?
Yep.
Your speed is kind of fast.
Yeah, sorry. yeah, everything will be posted on the YouTube channel. The whole thing, yes. Anything else? Good, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. But yeah, we just learned use effect, use state, and the basics of React. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And so I guess I'm gonna pass this over to the QHacks team, and they're gonna present the React challenge that you guys will now be doing.